All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here this afternoon for the Government and Tribal Partner webinar for our Bike Plus plan here at MnDOT. To get us started and to help break the ice here, if you want to use the chat feature to share your favorite bike and bike-like inspired Halloween costume idea that maybe you've seen in the past or one that you've done before, go ahead and share that in the chat while we take the first couple minutes here to let people kind of flow in, and then we'll get started into the rest of our presentation. Stranger Thing kids. That's a great one. I really appreciate those, as well as like the same vibe, like the ET bicycle Halloween costume ideas. It's pretty classic as well. And it really incorporates a full bike. 4-lane undivided street to scare neighbors. Thanks, Trey. I'm gonna paste a link in the chat here to a company called Madsen. I'm not promoting their product, but I do really like that they have a Halloween contest every year where they use their cargo bikes and people submit photos of how they've dressed up their cargo bike as a part of their Halloween theme for their family. Yes, if you've dressed up as a bus before, we'll count it. We'll count it as well. We're all friends in this space. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started into the presentation here. Feel free to continue to share your favorite bike or bike-like inspired Halloween costumes. I love seeing them, and I hope I can see photos of other people's in the future as well. Getting down to business here, I have to read this Tennyson warning for folks who are on the webinar today. MnDOT OTAP believes recording the webinar will further its mission and is the most beneficial way to memorialize this event. If your camera is on, your image, which may be private data, may be captured during this event. You are not required to allow MnDOT to use your image, and there are no consequences for declining to do so. The recording may be accessible to anyone who has a business or legal right to use it. By participating in today's webinar, you are authorizing the data collected during the recording to be maintained by MnDOT. Simply to opt out of the recording, please exit the webinar now. All right, next slide. So here's a quick overview today of what we're going to talk about during the webinar. We are going to first start with a really brief recap from the first webinar. And if folks want to see that webinar in its entirety, that is actually available on the Bike Plus Plan project website. Then we will focus much of our time today on how our engagement went this summer. We had our first phase of engagement, and we want to really share with people here what we've heard. We also want to gain insight into barriers to bicycling from the partner perspective and kind of gauge y'all's interest in that, as well as from the partner perspective is to gain insight into need identification and delivery. Then we'll get into what's next, and at the very end of today, we'll have a Q&A. So please use the Q&A feature if you are intending to ask a question of us. Next slide. All right, so a brief recap of the Government and Tribal Partner webinar number 1 that was in May of this year. Slide. First, we introduced our team. I am Jesse Thornson. I am Active Transportation Systems Designer at MnDOT. I am the MnDOT Project Manager of the Statewide Bicycle Plus System Plan. I am joined by co-project managers. Today, here we have Caroline Ketchum, who is one of our co-project managers, and then we also have Will Wislow, who is one of our co-project managers as well. Next slide. It's not just the 3 of us managing this plan. It's actually a whole team of people, very talented people, I should add, managing this plan. We have people who are working with Alta, Humanize Minnesota, Terrasoma, TC2, and Stantec, all joining us here to help us build this plan. This planning team has really a really great big history with working in biking in Minnesota, and we're glad to have them along with us. Maybe wondering what exactly is this government partner webinar thing that I've gotten myself into. This is a very brief explanation of what we are doing here today and why we are having these webinars. So we are really trying to get government partner coordination on the statewide Bike Plus plan. And we are doing that through 4 to 5 webinars over the course of 18 months through 2025 to 2026 to really help us along at key points in the planning process. We've created these webinars to really help match people's levels of participation that meet really your capacity. So at the very least, you can attend the webinar or watch the recording afterwards. That is kind of an easy thing to do, and we hope you all will at least do that. And then you can check that box off for today. Then you can provide feedback at the webinar. So we have the Q&A function. You can ask questions during this. That requires a little bit more effort, but at least you're able to get a little bit more input. And then finally, if you're desiring to hear more about the plan, to talk a little bit more with the project management team, we'll share a link where you can schedule a one-on-one follow-up meeting after today's webinar to meet with me to discuss the things you want to talk about for the plan. The advisory committee doesn't really pick favorites, so we're not trying to pick one people for here and there. And then it's going to be hopefully a process that works for us all. Bike Plus planning roles. So here, this is how that partner coordination and webinar process fits into the roles in this planning process. So we have you all joining this call today. We also have 2 different advisory committees. We have a project advisory committee, which is mostly policy-oriented staff here at MnDOT. And then we also have a district advisory committee, which is more on the operations side of MnDOT and our district folks who are advising the plan along the way. And then, of course, we will talk about this in more depth today. We have our public engagement, and then we also have our diverse bicycling perspectives focus group. So to let you know where we are during the plan, we are actually getting into the actual plan document development here soon. We're putting together a bunch of tech memos to essentially summarize the work that we've done to date, as well as that first phase of engagement. We will be working on that for the rest of this winter and into spring and early summer. And then in spring and summer, we will come back out with a second phase of engagement, essentially sharing out some of the things that we have put together and saying, hey, did we hear the correct things? Are we going along the right path? And then you can expect a final plan for the Bike Plus plan to be late summer, early fall next year. Next slide. So what is the Bike Plus plan? And we'll get into that at a very high level. Again, if you need more information, please refer back to that first webinar. But the Bike Plus plan fits within MnDOT's family of plans. It is one of our modal and system plans. Our modal and system plans are essentially kind of paint the vision of where we want to go and say, here is what we want that to look like along and across our system around in Minnesota. Next slide. The statewide Bicycle Plus system plan is a continuation of previous planning documents that we have here at MnDOT. Our most recent statewide bicycle system plan was completed in 2016. And then we had a follow-up implementation of district bicycle plans, which were finished in 2019. This statewide Bicycle Plus system plan is a continuation of both those types of documents. And you may ask, why are we updating the statewide bicycle system plan now? Well, I think the answer is there's just been lots of change within the last 10, 15 years, as you can kind of understand. Some of those things are state transportation goals, our overarching vision at Minnesota with DOT, which is Minnesota Go, updated engineering guidance. We have one of the nation's leading state DOT design manuals for bicycle facilities. We have updated Complete Streets policy and handbook. We have our Advancing Transportation Equity Initiative. We have climate change, greenhouse gas, and VMT commitments and targets, as well as bike-like trends that are kind of rising up to the surface. Next slide. Speaking of bike-like trends, you may have noticed that this isn't just the statewide bicycle system plan, it's the statewide bicycle plus system plan, and that's an intentional thing here. We are being more encompassing of all different types of bike modes. And essentially, we are saying that this plan is for people of all ages and abilities who bike, want to bike, and use bike-like modes of transportation in Minnesota. So yes, that includes e-bikes, it includes cargo bikes, it includes e-scooters, includes electric unicycles. Essentially, what we're looking at here is that all these users need to be safe along our roadways, and all these users have a very similar amount of kinetic energy and very similar characteristics, although a little bit different here and there, but generally we want to be able to plan a bike system that supports all these different types of users that we're seeing on the roadways today. Additionally, in our first webinar, we shared a little bit of the who bikes and why from like the research and numbers perspective. And so I'll share a little bit of that here. So from the who bikes perspective, we essentially brought in we looked at some modeling data from across the state and looked at who is making bike trips and who is making vehicle trips, and we kind of compared those together to see what is different about people who are biking in Minnesota versus people who are driving in Minnesota. It turns out there are some differences. People who bike in Minnesota are more likely to have lower incomes, identify as a person of color, have high school level or less formal education, but also on the other end of the spectrum of education have a more advanced degree. But people who bike are less likely to own a vehicle, be employed or in the labor force, live in a single family home or own their home. This is, compared to Minnesotans overall. And that's what the data was telling us. Next slide. So, in summary, all kinds of Minnesotans ride bikes. Sometimes we have a picture in our head of who that bicycle is. Sometimes that picture doesn't necessarily encompass all the folks who are riding out there at different times of the day and night. Next slide. We also looked at through literature why people bike, and I think some of these are obvious, but we wanted to make sure that we were grounding ourselves and really strengthening the reason why we were doing this. So people bike to improve their health. They bike when infrastructure is available. They bike out of convenience and practicality. Um, when it works for them and to avoid traffic and that type of thing. They bike because it costs less generally than driving around. It also is just the experience of cycling really gets people motivated. Social environment, personal characteristics, and safety. Some types of disabilities make biking safer than driving. We also looked at why people don't bike. Again, safety isn't here, but on the other side of things, one of the biggest concerns for people not biking is because they do not feel safe from essentially in areas of high traffic and speeding traffic, as well as other concerns of crime and other harassment forms. Infrastructure kind of goes along with safety, but maybe the infrastructure doesn't exist where they want to go. Convenience and practicality. There's a range anxiety with e-bikes sometimes. Also the low cargo capacity with some types of bikes. Money, if buying a bike seems like a lot of money if you already own a different type of vehicle that you're making payments towards. And then the experience of cycling, some folks just aren't taught how to ride a bike at an early age, the social environment, and as well as personal characteristics as well. I think one thing we hear time and time again, though, through literature and through different sources and every engagement event that we go into, and we'll talk about this more. Everyone who bikes wants separated places to ride. The strong majority of people, all genders, regions of the country, race and ethnicities, and income levels, they would bike more if they were physically separated by vehicles with a barrier. And now I am going to turn it over to my other colleagues to get into and share our public engagement that we went over this summer. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for being here. I'm going to give you a little overview of what we have heard and what we have done so far in phase one of our public engagement for this plan. I want to state first that, in order to, when we're understanding who bikes, why is that so important for us to do? Well, principally, it's so that we can build a well-informed plan that is really effective for people who are riding, and it's also so that we can build empathy around those identities and people who are biking. That allows us to really take their needs into account, to build for people who don't just fit the typical mold of a cyclist, and to understand their needs and build better for them. And we heard a lot about, who is biking through our literature review. We wanted to take it to Minnesotans and talk to them, gather their stories to get a really rich qualitative picture of who is biking, why they bike, and why they don't bike. So to do this, this spring and summer, we completed 13 engagement events. We hit all but one of our MnDOT districts, at least a couple times for most of them. We had 1,589 feedback points in person, as well as 1,167 online surveys. So we heard from a wide variety of people. We heard a wide variety of themes. And in addition to that, we also convened our diverse bicycling perspective focus group. You'll hear a little bit about that more in just a moment, but that allowed us to have deeper conversations based on different themes related to bicycling and gather those perspectives that we wouldn't necessarily hear from otherwise. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, this is the slide I want you to remember. We heard two things loud and clear across every type of engagement that we did. People bike because it's fun, and people don't bike as much as they want to because they lack safety. And to get a little deeper into those topics, people bike because they enjoy it. It's good for them. It makes them feel more physically, more mentally healthy, and it helps them connect to others. It's a great social opportunity as well. So, from that, we can take away the importance of designing networks that work for all ages and abilities and that are designed for comfort and to be enjoyable to use. That can keep people biking and get new people to bike if they weren't previously able to. I also want to highlight that e-bikes play into this theme pretty strongly. A lot of people shared with us that when they used e-bikes, it was easier and more enjoyable to bike further, to bike faster, and to go in more difficult terrain like hills, for example. If you've talked to somebody who's a newer e-bike user, they may have told you a story of getting on an e-bike for the first time and kind of recapturing that joy of riding a bike as a kid. This is something we hear a lot, and that's a really exciting opportunity. We also heard from people that safety concerns are the highest deterrent to biking, particularly when folks are concerned about interacting with vehicles, either biking in traffic, biking through intersections, on busy roads, and even when you're on an otherwise safe facility that has a gap where you have to interact with traffic. Another thing that surfaced related to safety and access is concerns about bicycle theft. People were concerned if they took their bike somewhere, even if they locked it up, it might be stolen. And they also described that occasionally they will encounter a lack of safe bicycle parking. So those are really strong themes and opportunities for us to get people into biking, to help people bike as much as they want to, and to break down some of those barriers for folks. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Abdullahi Abdullah to talk about our diverse bicycling perspectives focus group.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Abdullahi Abdullah, and it's great to be with you this afternoon. So this is, as Caroline mentioned, another opportunity that the project team thought about. Biking and the availability of biking the plan really affects all Minnesotans. However, historically, we know whenever we put together these plans, often there are unheard voices, there are community groups that their perspectives are not often easily heard, or the traditional norms of engagement might not work, even though this project really has a robust engagement that really includes diverse perspectives. This is a space that we intentionally created so that qualitative stories from community diverse communities can come to front and shape the conversations that we are having about biking and using bike-related like modes across the state. This is a focus group style that mixes a large group conversations of 10 to 15 people we recruited, even though that attendance kind of ranges and not exactly that number. Those large conversations are hosted in a more every month or every 2 months or so on a specific topic related to the plan, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But one other thing that we also do for this group is to make sure, again, we capture those rich community stories, is have one-on-one conversations with them as well, so that insights and perspectives that don't come to the front in the large setting can be shared with us in a one-on-one basis. These folks are mostly representing underserved communities, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as people from the disability community. They are compensated for both types of meetings. The short meetings are 30-minute one-on-one meetings, and then the longer meetings are about an hour. The focus group meetings are 1 hour. Next slide, you'll see what the themes of these conversations have been following. We started with initial introduction of the plan, and also introduction to sort of like top of mind thoughts that and perspectives that these folks bring to the conversation. And then we dived into our second topic is barriers to biking. And here is thinking about like, and when we host these conversations, we intentionally host them in a way that people really see themselves as experts in the communities that they live in. They know their neighborhoods, they know their cities, they know their counties, and they know their personal experiences and community experiences. So we wanted to make sure that they have a space that they can comfortably share those stories. And you will see a glimpse of that in the next couple of slides. But barriers to biking, for example, is one of those spaces that what real physical barriers or perceptive barriers that stop people from trying biking as a mode of transportation, or even biking or using bike-like modes. And we have heard really rich content and insights from these folks. And then what does it mean to actually be a bicyclist, right? Does everybody that bike see themselves as a bicyclist? Or is it a certain person that with certain gear and equipment, or a certain type of a bike that is considered a bicyclist? And then what is the role of safety? Again, physical safety, safety from getting harmed by a moving vehicle, or safety for your own personal belongings for the bike that you ride, and having the equipment and the tools that you need to keep your personal belongings and your tool of transportation. If you are biking to a place, you want to get back home safely. So if you're worried about getting your bike stolen, it could be a barrier, and we have heard that already from the conversations. We'll talk about the trade-offs and making sure hearing the perspectives of these folks from their communities and what they think about what they think would work to make biking work for all communities across the state. And then the idea of freedom, comfort, and connection already came up. Biking is just a joyous mode of transportation. However, that is the access to that. To biking infrastructure is not easily accessible to folks, and sometimes the access issues are are perceptive barriers. Other times it's just we don't have the physical environment built and inviting for people to just go out there and go to the destinations that they want to go to. And also learning to bike and making biking mainstream. It's not, I personally learned to bike when I was going to college, just back in my undergraduate. That was the first time that I tried biking and fell multiple different times and then learned. And now I really love biking and considering it as an option. And this is not an isolated case. So it's not every adult or young person knows how to bike. And if you could here are a few select a glimpse of what we're hearing from these conversations. Again, connecting to the safety issue again, one of our focus group members shared that the quote that you see here, and I'll just read that to give it some weight. I was almost killed last summer while biking. And so since then, I've really tried to be much more vocal about the fact that things like paint aren't infrastructure. It needs to be a set aside, fully protected bike lanes for people, right? Like this could be a barrier for somebody, right? If you're not sure that you'll be if you know that you'll be in harm's way, you might hesitate to really ride, even though you wanna try biking first. And another quote here: as a woman who's biking, I tend not to bike at night. Again, another side of personal safety and security, something that we're here and prevents people from trying to bike. So these are some of the other barriers that came up: infrastructure and safety, the security from whether it's just personal security or safety for your belongings, for the bike itself, the weather conditions, right? Half of the year, it's very difficult to bike unless you have the right type of a bike. And that is, again, adds a little more pressure to folks to, well, and also financial barriers, because now you are considering buying some type of a bike that work, either hybrid or work winter condition appropriate. And so this came up a lot. And again, just some community, social and cultural perceptions, right? Not every community sees biking as a mainstream norm. So this plan, and again, having space for these types of conversations to come to the forefront and inform a plan like this is really a groundbreaking and a very hopeful idea. And I think that this, so it was, these types of conversations can come up and inform our plan. I believe there's a couple more slides. And again, folks are not only sharing some of the barriers and issues that they see, they're also sharing solutions, potential solutions, including just, as you have seen from the last code, expanded infrastructure, put in money into making biking viable and safe and comfortable mode of transportation. Being able to bike and the freedom of that is just something that is hard to want to let go. Folks are sharing that once they tried biking, it's just difficult to just not keep biking and finding biking community and contributing to biking conversations like the diverse bicycling perspectives that we put together. And we can go to these are some of the other solutions that they proposed: improved safety and security, increased accessibility. And here, one more note about the accessibility here. Folks are sharing and that there's a mainstream perception that you have to look certain way, or you have to come from certain community background or economic background to be able to bike. But that is really, like, folks don't have shared that they haven't seen people that look like them that bike often, or they see folks that wear special gear, and then that sort of like creates mental barriers for them that, you know, do I need to look like that to just enjoy biking? So that is what that gets into education and awareness. So then education and awareness can help with that, right? Just sharing different examples, different ways that, you know, folks can try biking. And then just community and support is more about finding groups to bike with. Some of the folks that we connected with in the DBB, or the first bicycle perspectives is back in the pandemic era, it started a cycling group that just started with a couple of people, like 2-3 people, and then expanded to like 20 people that just every self-organize and go into leisure biking, and then that can even graduate into using biking as a everyday mode of transportation, where you just go bike to work or to do your groceries. And if you go to the next slide, please. That was the end of my my slides. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Abdullahi. My name is Trey Joyner with TC2. And yeah, we're leading some of the in-person engagement and online engagement for the bike plan. And I just can't let Abdullahi in without, congratulating him and thanking him for like his effort on the DBP, because I'm very passionate about engagement. I think it's so enriching to have in-depth conversations with people around it and deconstructing the perceptions around it and actually figuring out what motivates people to bike and what doesn't motivate people to bike. So with that said, let's go to some pop-up stuff. So we have done a very exhaustive approach to finding ideal events across the state for the bike plan. I think we looked at a number of like 200 to 300 events and then narrowed them down to at least 2 events per district, or attempted to narrow them down to 2 events per district. And we had a lot of lessons learned, lessons learned that were like great, like example, the Worthington International Festival. It's a great event, pulls out a lot of different crowds, a lot of different international crowds. And I remember hearing from one of the team that went out there and did engagement that people hadn't biked in like ever. And they were really just having a first introduction to biking. And I think it's particularly because of their, association to biking, because of their kind of, their nationality or their identity. And I think that's really interesting to be able to introduce them to the plan at this point, and it really asked them the question, what motivates them to bike and what doesn't motivate them to bike. And another great event was the MPLS MPLS Schools Let's Roll event, where we had like, 200 something kids rolling around on Plymouth Avenue, some protected bicycle infrastructure, and explaining their reasons for being motivated to bike and not motivated to bike. And so we've done a lot of great events, but we also have had some events canceled due to weather or rain or just complications with everyday life. And so it's a really big effort. And I think this recap of our past events is very telling that we know what we need to do for phase 2. And it's very, I think it's very enlightening. So not to restate that too much. So next slide, we're going to focus on some of the feedback points that Caroline mentioned, the 1,500 or so feedback points. So just to kind of break it down a little bit, we had a dot voting exercise that allowed people to indicate why they're motivated to bike. That allowed them to put multiple dots on different categories that range from like safety to community safety, various different topics. And so what we learned is that, as Caroline mentioned, the fun and the healthy nature of biking is the main reason people are motivated to bike, and that's great to hear and incredibly important. Next slide. And then what motivated people not to bike? As Caroline mentioned, infrastructure gaps, safety concerns, cost and access. But there are a number of different categories that kind of popped up, as you can see in the graph to the right. Some people were never taught how to ride. Speaking to that Worthington event, people's ability to ride, that came up a decent amount. It's just really, really digging down to those details, I think is incredibly important, because it's, we're trying to improve and make this more accessible for a broader range of Minnesotans, and understanding the reasons behind that, even the more insignificant reasons, is incredibly important. Next slide. So then, thinking about those feedback points earlier, as I mentioned, so what we did is that we took a written comment or recorded a comment from a conversation. We broke that into themes. So it could be like supportive to biking or bike infrastructure or maintenance. And then those themes from a particular comment were broken down into feedback points. So if someone said a very long, dissertation on why they love to bike, we would break that into themes, and then each different theme is a feedback point. And so that's kind of how we've like categorized the written and recorded comments. And as you can see, bike infrastructure was the main thing that people mentioned in these, when they wrote down something or recorded that through conversation. Followed by safety from cars, access, and fun biking with others. So we'll drill down into like what they actually said in those larger themes. So for bike infrastructure, people want a continuous, protected, well-maintained bike facilities. That is, common sense, almost, kind of understanding, what it's like to bike across the state. They also just want high quality facilities, and they want to feel safer, more comfortable, and just they're willing to ride their bike more often if those conditions are met. When that came up through people's conversations, we coded those as bike infrastructure, and we really kind of took an intentional look about, okay, well, how are people's ideas and comments forming around this overall theme? Next slide. The next one was safety from cars, related to bike infrastructure, but people told us they don't feel safe near fast-moving traffic, reinforces the need for comfortable, safe, protected facilities, and biking feels more safe and more comfortable when they're in those facilities or when vehicles are moving slowly. And we all know that, you don't have to put protected facilities on every street, but the type of protection needs to match the context and volume of the street. And people understood that through engagement, which is why some of the feedback we heard around safety from cars varied in terms of like, people asking for protection or asking for slower vehicles. The next one, I combined these two, access and fun from biking was like 10 and 9%. Kind of speaking to some of the stuff we heard from what Abdullahi highlighted for the DBP, people found out, people mentioned that they lacked access to bicycles or lacked education around bicycles, which can kind of be, moved, considered as part of the umbrella of access. And then also people just knowing that biking is an extremely fun endeavor for them, and mainly because they do it with people who also like to bike and like being out in nature and it just being a healthy activity. And so that was very enlightening, I think, for me as we were going over the technical summary for all these themes and some of our DOT voting activity, because it was like enlightening in a very positive way. So I'm like, wow, this is awesome. All we have to do is just make this more fun and more safe. And that's something that, I think we're all working to in our jobs to really work towards. We did another event. It was an e-bike stories event. So kind of pivoting away from our DOT voting activity and our written and recorded comments, kind of facilitated activities. We just really wanted to know like what people thought about e-bikes and what were stories that kind of contextualize the experience of wanting to ride an e-bike or riding an e-bike. And we heard some really great feedback. People mentioned that it broadened some of the activities that they can do, whether it's like traveling to work or traveling with their kids or dropping their kids off at school. And also just understanding that it's important for people that, MnDOT is setting the right standards and policies around e-bikes. This is more anecdotal, but I work on a lot of street reconstruction projects, and I've heard a lot from people across the metro, noting that people travel really, really fast on e-bikes on like off-street trails, for, like recreationally or for other reasons. But that's also kind of coming into context, like, well, we have to design and understand how these modes operate to design facilities that are comfortable for a range of users and a range of abilities. Yeah, I'll pass it to Caroline to talk about our our online engagement.
Thanks, Trey. So another component of our engagement effort, as well as getting out and talking to people in person at events where they already were, was to open up a survey. And so we had this open from May through September, and as I mentioned earlier, received over 1,000 responses, which was really exciting. And by the way, our Let's Talk page, which the URL is on this slide, is still open. The survey is not open anymore, but this is a great place to go if you want to follow along with news and plan progress. So just to plug that as well. Next slide, please. We were excited to see that we got a reasonably good geographic distribution of folks answering our survey. Naturally, we got most of our responses from the Twin Cities area, given that that's where most people live. But we also got some significant responses from some of the more rural or smaller urban areas in the state. Part of that, I think, is because we were pretty intentional about going to events in those areas that attracted folks from those metros and from smaller rural communities. And yeah, this was a great way for us to reach folks from around the state. One thing that we thought was pretty interesting to highlight was we asked people why they typically ride a bike. And we thought of this as either a transportation or a recreation function. So 12% of people told us they primarily ride for transportation, 31% told us primarily recreation, and over half told us that they ride for both reasons. So that's pretty interesting. I think we had been thinking about this as, you are either a transportation or a recreation rider. And we found that that isn't always true for folks. It's different in different situations. This points to something that is true, in my own experience as a bike rider, is that I started riding my bike as an adult for recreation. And once I saw how fun and enjoyable it was, I wanted to do it more. And then I started biking for transportation. So this is a really interesting piece of feedback that we got that we're reflecting on as we move through this plan. I hope you guys are noticing as we're going through these slides that a lot of similar themes are coming up in engagement, regardless of the source of the engagement. So from survey themes, we heard similar things to what the DBP folks said and what people said in in-person engagement. And this is, it's pretty intuitive. People who ride bikes want to ride in places that are safe from vehicle traffic. They want to ride networks that are complete, that are continuous, and that make sense, that are easy to navigate. They want to be able to get through intersections in a way that's safe. They want to ride in places that are maintained all year, including in the winter. They want to be able to park their bike safely and be confident that the bike will still be there when they get back. And they want to see drivers and other cyclists and just everybody out using the road behaving in a safe way and keeping each other safe. So we're going to dig into a little bit more about these themes that we heard. And I think anybody who bikes regularly or has biked in the past, this won't be a big surprise. People want to bike in places where they feel safe from motor vehicles. People want more bike lanes and bike paths generally, but not only that, they want them to be separated. People do not like riding next to fast-moving traffic. They don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable. So this again highlights how important it is to create and prioritize separated bike infrastructure to get people to bike who may not feel comfortable doing it otherwise. Another type of separation that folks alluded to was separating between pedestrians and cyclists. So this depends on the context. In some places, shared use path might make sense for some, but people noted that, there's a difference in how fast folks are traveling these different modes, and sometimes it makes sense to not put them together. And next slide. Okay, so folks also told us that they, safe street design as well as safe bike facilities are important, especially when you're crossing a street as a cyclist. Crossing on a highway or a busy street, can take a pretty safe and comfortable bike trip into something that feels pretty frightening if your separated bike lane has a brief break where it goes across a higher speed roadway. Folks want to see cars driving more slowly when they have to interact with them, and really encouraged us as MnDOT to prioritize multimodal infrastructure that gives space for biking, walking, and transit, and puts that as equal priority to motor vehicles in our transportation projects. And of course, as again, to the cyclists among us or folks who have bicycled before, you know that a bike facility is only as good as its weakest link. Folks want to see high quality bike infrastructure that connects them all the way through their trip to key destinations. They have observed that routes often don't feel direct or convenient. Like maybe you can cobble together a route using separated bike facilities, but it takes a little bit of figuring out. It's not intuitive, and that can be frustrating for people. It's just another barrier to navigating versus driving a motor vehicle. People were really excited about the idea as well of a connected recreational trail system. So getting back to some more of those recreationally focused users. And people also voice support for linking up urban and rural areas, so getting from city to city and not just around within cities themselves. People also wanted to talk about maintenance, particularly winter maintenance. So this is a tough one for folks in Minnesota. Especially, if you're a newer bike rider, maybe you're feeling really confident through the warmer months when our infrastructure is clear and usable. Then winter comes and and you feel like you have to stop completely. People mentioned that they really wanted to see paving our bike facilities or plowing them prioritized. They also want to see regular maintenance to make sure that our infrastructure doesn't have cracks, doesn't have potholes, surfaces that make it rough to ride on. And people told us that they think maintenance is at least as much of a priority as new construction. So a brand new bike facility that is separated, feels really comfortable and safe. If it's not plowed when it snows, that's not a safe and comfortable facility. All right, people also told us that lack of bike parking is a real issue for them. And, I can, this is relevant, I think, for me too, personally. A lot of these themes resonated for me personally. I have an e-bike as of the last couple of years. It's a more expensive bike than my other bikes are, and it makes my trips a lot easier, but it also means that I can't go places where I don't feel safe or comfortable leaving that bike for longer periods of time. As we mentioned earlier, people told us that, when you're biking and that's your form of transportation, if that bike is stolen and you can't get home, then that's really not safe or comfortable and not a way you're going to choose to get around. People also told us that they wanted better integration with transit, which I thought was pretty interesting. Transit can be a really great way to have a backup for your bike trip. So people wanted to see bike racks on buses, secure bike parking at transit facilities, and just better ability to plan trips and plan for secure bike parking at your destination. And finally, people told us that they just wanted to see other users of the transportation system behave more safely and give each other more space, respect, and just behave well on our streets and roads and trails. So folks mentioned that they would like to see public education campaigns to raise awareness about what's legal for bikes, how to safely drive around bikes, what bicycles and pedestrians' rights are. People wanted to see education efforts that target both motorists and cyclists, so everybody should know the rules of the road. Some folks also mentioned that they wanted to see stronger enforcement. So there are different ways we can address this, through a safe system approach, getting folks to drive more safely, to bike more safely. We can encourage that through enforcement. We can also encourage it through building infrastructure that encourages people to travel at a safer speed. People really wanted to see education related to e-bikes. I think that's something we see a lot is e-bikes are a newer technology. There's less common understanding about them. People are curious and people are concerned. So people wanted to see more education about how to ride an e-bike safely, what's legal and what's appropriate. All right. And at this point, we are going to move to a Menti activity to get you guys to weigh in. So please feel free to keep using the chat. I'm seeing great comments come in that are really helpful for us. But we want to move through a few questions. just to hear if what we're describing from our engagement, does it match what you often hear, or is there something you're hearing in your community that you don't think we've reflected here?
We've got a link in the chat, as well as you can use this code at the top of the screen. Okay, we're hearing mostly yes. You can
Yeah,
keep answering that
feels pretty
question
conclusive.
as we go to the next one.
Cool. So for those of you who maybe said it matched somewhat with what you heard, or even for those of you who said it matched pretty well what you're already hearing, we're really curious to know if there's anything surprising from what we've just told you, things that you weren't surprised to hear that you're hearing a lot. What stood out to you?
I'll add
And
to this
again,
one.
oh, go ahead,
No, I
Jesse.
was just gonna say I'll add to this one. And this is cheating because I've been a part of the process a little bit more intimately. But one thing that surprised me in our diverse bicycling perspective focus group meeting is we did ask the question like, which of you have had a bike stolen before? And this was a virtual environment, and every single person said, I have. Every person on that call said they've had at least one or sometimes two bikes stolen. So it was very surprising, like a new bike that's with an issue, but generally it was very widespread when we were talking about it.
Thanks, Jesse. That was such a, I think, profound insight, because what I was thinking as people share that, not only that this was so prevalent, but it was the idea that when you go to a place using a like transportation method, you expect to go back, right? You have things to do after whatever you do, whatever you want to do at that time. And if in the back of your mind you're worried your transportation vehicle will be stolen, in this case it's a bicycle, it kind of you'll maybe reconsider sometimes. So it's, to me, that aspect of it was just such a profound, I think, insight, and I was just surprised how many people had that experience, and also the impact that it could have, because now you're stuck if your bicycle is stolen, right? So, and if you don't have the right locking mechanism, it's just it was opening a whole new window of anxiety related to viability of biking, and we can overcome that, but to understand that it's a reality was just such a significant insight, I think.
I'll say to the comments about rural engagement, our summary was based on zip codes, and so the first three digits of like sorting facilities and that type of thing. So we have general areas of Minnesota that are represented in those online engagement results. So we did hear quite a few from rural communities as well. It just doesn't, it's not as easy to show in a summary list as well.
All right, so feel free to keep chiming in on that question before. Use the chat if Menti isn't your thing, but we'd love to hear if there are any results that don't capture what you've been finding. Is there anything you'd like to add that you found that you feel like we haven't reflected here, or any other thoughts you have about what we've presented to you?
Caroline, maybe to touch on something I saw in the last one, someone put in the comment about they would have thought that low cost of bicycling would be a main driver for bicycling. And, based upon some of the technical work that Maria's team has been doing around like who technically we understand who bikes, I think it's really interesting because I think some of our engagement may have like missed a demographic of people who have to bike, like who don't have any other option to bike. Lack of transit, lack of a vehicle. I think in that circumstance, you would have people who like, oh yeah, bicycling is a low cost option, and that's what my main reason to do it. I think a lot of people we engage, and I wouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people we engage bike because they chose to bike.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point, Trey. Something else we found, when we spoke to people and when we did this research, there were a few motivations for biking that we expected to see more and didn't, at least as a primary motivation. And I think another one of those was concern about the environment or climate change. So I think we're finding that these are reasons that people are keeping in mind when they're biking, but it might be a secondary reason. And for folks who do have the option of driving a vehicle, something that people are sort of doing as a matter of course is they're often choosing to do that because it's comfortable. So to me, when you're looking at folks who maybe have options, it makes sense that you're choosing your mode based on what feels safe and comfortable to you. And if biking is not something that feels safe and comfortable to you, it makes sense that you would seek out other options. But yeah, I'd be curious to know if there's anything else that people were expecting to hear, such as the environmental reasons or the low cost reasons or anything else that stood out.
And I'll just jump in as I'm seeing, how about local political opposition to adding bike infrastructure or the cost of bike infrastructure? I think we were really engaging people on why they, as individuals, bike or don't bike versus kind of the community level of why does a community invest in biking or not invest in biking. But we are thinking about those through other parts of the Bike Plus plan. Should we keep moving to the next section? Thanks everybody for your input. And
yeah, feel free to keep putting stuff in the Menti. If you're able, keep putting stuff in the chat. It's great to hear from you all on your reactions. And yeah, thanks Maria for helping us through the Menti activity.
Yeah. All right, next we're going to talk about barriers to bicycling. And I can share a little bit about what we're thinking, and Jesse, feel free to chime in. So we are working right now on identifying the physical barriers to biking. We're connecting it with the findings from engagement and the barriers to biking people shared from a more qualitative perspective. But what we're doing right now is to identify the physical barriers, which possibly include the trunk highway system. Well, more on that in a minute. other arterial roadways, railroad corridors, bodies of water, types of things that when we don't have great ways to cross them can present barriers to biking. So we wanted to hear a bit from you all about where do you see the most gaps in your bike transportation network? Jesse, feel free to jump in if you want to give any more context for these questions.
Yeah, and if we don't receive any comments for this one, we might be able to flip to the next one because that one does have a little bit more context. Because sometimes where you see the most gaps might also relate to what are some of the reasons for gaps in your bike network as well. Seeing land use in here, everywhere, yeah. It's in county infrastructure. Yep, you have to have a bike network to understand where the gaps are in the bike network to begin with. Crossing highways, bridges, bike parking, major arterial roads. Definitely sense a common theme from the traffic perspective. Feel free to keep adding to this. I think we can roll into the next one here because it's a very related question, and we just want to be able to kind of summarize it as well. What are some of the reasons for gaps in your bike transportation network? I think we have multiple options. Can people select multiple options? I can't remember if we, okay.
Yeah.
For the folks that are saying other, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing those in the chat when you get a chance as well. I'd be curious to see what other maybe for some people. Jurisdictional confusion is probably a good one. Coordination with other jurisdictions. Yep, the maintenance consideration. Missed opportunities. That's a big one. Being a DOT worker, those are always the worst when you come across them eventually. It's like, oh, there was a missed opportunity over here, and it can be a sombering moment, but yeah, perceptions. No one will use them. I appreciate y'all sharing with us.
Now thinking about if you have a planned bike or active transportation network, do you plan for bike facilities across the trunk highway system? So thinking about crossing, and the next question will be about along the trunk highway system. So what we're kind of curious about here is the relationship between the local networks and the trunk highways. So I think anything you have to say about that would be valuable.
A simple yes, no, or unsure works here as well.
Seeing several yeses, intentions to do so, but whether or not they actually happen in the final design is yet to be seen. A trunk highway bisects the city, therefore any facility must cross the trunk highway.
Yeah, that one's a very common theme, especially with a lot of our smaller towns. Main Street often happens to be a trunk highway. And so in order to connect residents, businesses, and other things through the city, it's necessary to cross.
Okay. And then, yes, this is a relatively recent improvement in approach to joint county MnDOT projects. Crossing the trunk highway is difficult for all non-vehicle travel. Working on a plan now, and that has been a major feedback point. And also with several bike and pedestrian bridges planned, which I assume are across the trunk highway. Okay, let's talk about along the trunk highway. If you have a planned bike or active transportation network, do you plan for bike facilities along the trunk highway system? So we're seeing yeses. And a no. I think you should be able to submit multiple responses. But I'm curious about if you can say why for yes or no. One person shared, no, the land use doesn't really make sense in our situation. Not planning for a bike facility along that trunk highway. Not specifically planning for bike facilities along the trunk highway, though some follow logical routes alongside them. Often the highway system is the only place with sufficient right-of-way.
Honestly, I haven't thought about that one before, and that does make sense in a lot of cases where the highway right of way ends up being the largest amount of right of way available, even though oftentimes we're dealing with the very difficult constrained right of way situations when we do end up building them.
So
Yep.
not useful for actually navigating the city. Kind of depends perhaps on where the trunk highway is.
It's very helpful. Thank you, folks.
One more question about barriers. Is the trunk highway network a barrier to bicycling? And then if so, what makes the trunk highway network a barrier? from different perspectives. One, not really, yes, can be a barrier if crossings are unavailable or too far apart. Crossing distance and detour travel time. Two people saying it bisects important areas. There are only 2 or 3 crossings, and most are fairly treacherous for bikes and peds. Few crossings, the only crossings are high-speed interchanges, daunting crossings. Yeah, so like number of crossings is coming up. Speed of traffic, lack of crossing infrastructure. Yeah, so some aren't too bad, but in this case, 212 is pretty insurmountable for crossing. Yeah, so both crossing at grade at complex intersections or exits. Glad somebody brought that up as well. Prefer not to cross at grade, but separated crossings are cost prohibitive. And in Duluth, Saba Avenue, I didn't mean to click on it. And Highway 53 would be great routes. But there are no safe bicycling facilities. Lack of network connectivity. So,
I think the land use pattern one is actually really interesting because it's talking about some, like, it depends on when your that particular area had developed at a point in time. Did it develop before the trunk highway came in, or did it develop after the trunk highway came in? And understanding that maybe the trunk highway is a barrier, but then additionally the types of land uses that develop along that highway as well are sort of adding to that barrier perspective too.
Right. We got one more area where we're hoping to get some feedback from you today around bicycle need identification and delivery. So this is one of the maybe more technical areas of what we're doing with the Bike Plus plan. We are looking at the purpose and need statement that is part of the NEPA process. It comes after, or kind of at the same time as planning and scoping, performance, public input, asset management. All those are kind of inputs into the purpose and need statement. That dictates then evaluation criteria that are used to evaluate alternatives when we're doing a roadway project. So what we're doing is exploring how to justify bicycle and bike-like mode comfort and safety as primary and or secondary needs in MnDOT purpose and need documents. And we think it's an interesting area to look at because the purpose and need statement presents an opportunity for collaboration across different groups, across planners and engineers and communications. So we're trying to learn more about this. So we'd like to know, I guess first, what is the primary focus of building your bike network? Transportation, both equally. Recreation. Okay, so I'm spread across these options roughly equally. Getting a bit more on both equally. So we're curious how familiar you are with the transportation project purpose and need statements. Never heard of them, somewhat familiar, very familiar. Okay, some somewhat familiar. Right. So, okay, for those of you, assuming those who haven't ever heard of it have not been involved in developing a transportation project purpose and need statement. So for those of you who have, we're curious to know, was bicycling considered in that process? Did you successfully justify a bicycle need, developing that purpose and need statement? Or this could just be one you're aware of. Not that you personally developed it, but okay, no responses yet. Okay, yes, Trunk Highway 65 through Blaine. And then if you want to add another comment to let us know if bicycling was considered and if it included a bicycle need, that'd be great.
Yeah, I believe on the Trunk Highway 65 project there was some bike needs on that one.
Okay. We won't linger too long on this one. But we would love for an action item for you to share your experience. Please send us your NEPA or MEPA, that's the Minnesota version of MEPA, purpose and need statements for projects that included successful bike facility improvements. That would help us out in understanding this part of the process of getting bike infrastructure built. All right, Jesse, anything to add before we kind of move into our wrap up?
No, while I wrap up here, I'll just encourage folks to think about any questions that you may have for us to answer, and please enter those into the Q&A area of the webinar here. After I wrap up this next slide, we'll get into our Q&A portion. So thanks for sticking along with us. So if Maria, you want to move to the next slide, that's my email there. Again, my email's on this slide as well as kind of what's next. So what is next for us? Well, we're going to continue, like I said, working on our statewide bicycle plus system plan document. We're taking a lot of that engagement that we heard and integrating it into all of our technical tasks. So in that meantime, after this webinar, if you feel like you want to talk to me a little bit more about this plan, you have some things that you really want to share, even if you have concerns, whatever it may be, just you want an extra 30 minutes just to hear me ramble on about bikes. Book a one-on-one webinar follow-up meeting with me. You can do so by going to the link that is on the screen there. I think I will try to see if I can enter that into the chat too, so you don't have to actually manually type it out. And then while you are thinking if you want to talk to me, you can also, if you haven't done recently, is update your bikeways data. And then once it's updated, send it to MnDOT. If you don't know, MnDOT hosts a statewide bikeways map, and that map is actually a representation of the data that is sent to us from our partners saying we have bikeways in these particular locations around the state. It can be a helpful map to folks if the data on that map is up to date. We could also potentially use this data as we start to think through different things in our bike plan, like what does the network look like today? What do we want to what do we want it to look like in the future? Should we be using everyone's bikeways data that they're sharing with us in a priority tool to prioritize investments in some places and not in other places? So if you could send us that bikeway data, a most updated version of it, please do so. And then finally, like we just mentioned on the last slide, if you have some really nerdy purpose and need NEPA stuff, feel free to send it to me. We could always use outside sources, specifically locally in Minnesota, to help amplify and augment the amount of work that we're doing to understand how do we continue to have bike needs represented in the planning process and have those carry forward through a transportation project's life cycle. So those are kind of the things that we have up next. Of course, there will also be another government partner webinar with a date unannounced yet, but look forward to that probably towards the sometime in winter, end of winter, and then in 2026. Next slide. All right, question time. I don't see any questions in the chat now, which means maybe we did a really great job. But if not, please put a question in the chat. And even if you don't have one, like I said, follow up with me either via email or book an appointment. I will see. I think I entered into the chat for the appointments. Yes, I did. And then if there aren't any questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes here to allow some time for folks to answer questions. We're here till 1:30. Other than that, feel free to drop off. Have a great day. Hope you can get in a lot of fun bike rides prior to whenever it is that you stop biking during the year. I'm a year-round cyclist because it's just really fun going through the snow sometimes. Also hurts if you fall, but I really hope you all can continue in your bike planning and bike designing endeavors and continue to make the rest of Minnesota a very bike-friendly place because it is fun. Some of the photos in those pictures featuring kids were my kids having fun on bikes. So I really hope that y'all can do that, and I'm looking forward to see you at our next webinar. Like I said, I'll stick around here, but feel free to leave if you don't have any questions. Oh, I see a question in the chat actually. One of the questions in the chat is what are your thoughts about redesigning bike facilities to accommodate the faster traveling e-bikes? Is there a realistic solution to address the issues, concerns you've heard? That's a complicated question to answer, but I will say that there may be opportunities in the future to think about how we are designing our bike facilities. For one, from the MnDOT perspective, we will be updating our bicycle facility design manual within the next year or two. And so with that, we will be trying to make sure that we integrate the latest research into e-bike usage and how e-bikes operate. To report out on that, we actually do have a study ongoing right now with the University of Minnesota where we are actually studying e-bike operational characteristics. We're essentially attaching smartphones to bikes, e-bikes, regular bikes, people that are biking from different backgrounds, and trying to see what are the characteristics of those folks biking around. And it's a really fun project. I joked I really want to wear my lab coat when I'm one of the test participants, but we're really hoping to integrate that. Some of the preliminary things that we're thinking about is like, if you're designing around e-bikes, it does maybe require passing lanes in places where that makes sense. Specifically like uphill portions of roadways, because downhill portions don't make as much sense because regular bicyclists and e-bicyclists are usually going about the same speed on the downhill portions. And then designing to minimum is going to be a challenge for bicycle facilities in the future, especially when we're talking about people going at different speeds too. So certainly want to pay more attention and not designing to the minimum if we don't really have to. Let's see.
Jesse, I'd like to take Patrick's question about
Yeah, go ahead.
Homemade motorized contraptions.
Oh no.
So the short answer to your question, Patrick, is yes. This is a phenomenon we're encountering. One of the other studies that MnDOT is working on currently is a study about youth e-bike safety. That's one of the things that I'm working on. And we have encountered kind of a there's a lot of things that when the general public talks about e-bikes, they're not necessarily referring to legal e-bikes, which are pretty specifically defined in statute. And there are a number of characteristics that they have that I won't go into, but we're seeing a lot of what we call e-motos, and those are e-bike-like devices. They might look like e-bikes, but they differ from e-bikes in some significant way. Typically, that means that they go a lot faster. So if you're seeing something on the street that looks to you like an e-bike, but is traveling like 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, that's not an e-bike. So yes, that's something we're observing, and we're definitely seeing a need for education and understanding of what is legally an e-bike, who can legally ride an e-bike, how do you do it safely, and how do you buy one that is safe and reliable and not an e-moto from Temu or something. So thanks for bringing that up.
All right, well, thanks folks for joining us. Really appreciate you coming here today. And with that, I think we're going to end our event. So long.